10:05 in the morning, the Baltic Sea. An American F-22 Raptor cruised through the thin air at 30,000 feet. It was not alone. Behind its twin engines, a Russian Sukhoi Su-35 was already closing the distance at Mach 1.2. This was not supposed to happen. How a non-stealthy Russian fighter had tracked the world's premier stealth interceptor remained a question that would soon haunt the Pentagon. The air over the Baltic was crystal clear and freezing. Below, the water was a deep, unforgiving gray. Major Ethan Vance sat in the cockpit of the Raptor. He was a veteran with over 2,000 hours in the air. To his sensors, the world was empty. His radar screen was a clean sweep of blue. His digital displays showed no threats and no electronic emissions. The stealth technology of his aircraft was designed to make him a ghost. For 40 minutes, he had been a ghost. Vance adjusted his oxygen mask and checked his fuel state. He was nearing the end of his patrol loop. The mission was a standard show of force near the border of Kaliningrad. It was meant to be boring. Then, a single amber light flickered on his secondary console. It was the infrared search and track warning. Something was projecting a heat signature directly behind him. 10:07 in the morning. The Major looked at his mirrors. He saw nothing but the vast horizon. He checked his radar once more. It remained silent. No one was painting him with a tracking beam. No one was trying to lock on. Yet, the infrared warning stayed solid. The heat source was not a glitch. It was a massive twin-engine signature. It was moving at high speed. It was gaining. Vance spoke into his encrypted radio. "Magic. This is Slayer 1-1. Requesting a picture of my 6 o'clock. I have a possible heat signature." The Airborne Warning and Control System controller responded from a Boeing E-3 Sentry 50 miles to the west. "Slayer. Magic. Your 6 is clean. Nearest friendly is 50 miles out. Nearest hostile is a flight of 2 on the ground at Kaliningrad. You are alone in your sector." Vance did not like the answer. The amber light was now pulsing. The intruder was within 5 miles. He initiated a shallow climb to 35,000 feet. He wanted to see if the contact would follow. The heat signature tracked his altitude change instantly. It was not a cloud. It was not a sensor error. It was a shadow. 10:10 in the morning. Vance decided to break the routine of the patrol. He banked the Raptor hard to the left and pushed the throttles into full afterburner. The force of the acceleration pressed him into his seat. He looked over his left shoulder, squinting against the glare of the morning sun. A flash of polished metal appeared against the blue. It was the Su-35. The Russian fighter was painted in a disruptive blue camouflage. It was so close that Vance could see the individual numbers on its tail. The Russian pilot was performing a maneuver that defied the standard laws of energy management. He was not just following the Raptor, he was shadowing it, with a level of precision that should have been aerodynamically impossible. The Russian jet did not use radar. It did not emit a single radio wave. It was using a passive optical sensor to track the heat of the Raptor's engines. The Su-35 pivoted on its thrust vectoring nozzles. It turned within the Raptor's own circle. This was a direct challenge to the supremacy of American stealth. Vance realized he was no longer the hunter. He was being measured. The Russian pilot did not pull away. He did not signal. He simply sat in the blind spot of the most advanced fighter in the world. He was waiting for something. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 10:11 in the morning. The Baltic Sea. Inside the cockpit of the Raptor, the silence was replaced by the low hum of cooling fans and the heavy breathing of Major Vance. He bank-angled the aircraft 60 degrees. He pulled 6 Gs of pressure. The F-22 was designed to outturn anything in the sky. Yet, as the horizon tilted, the blue camouflage of the Sukhoi remained fixed in his canopy. It moved like a shadow attached to his own wing. Vance keyed his radio again. His voice was forced and tight. "Magic. Slayer 1-1. I have a visual on a flanker E. He is on my 6 o'clock. Distance is less than 300 meters. He is not using radar. I say again, he is not using radar." The controller at the Airborne Warning and Control System station sounded stunned. "Slayer, Magic. We still have nothing on our scopes. We are seeing your transponder only. Are you sure of the contact? Vance snapped back. Confirm. I am looking at him. He is right here. He is mimicking every maneuver. Get me a supervisor. 10:13 in the morning. 500 feet away, Captain Nikolai Volkov adjusted his grip on the stick of the Sukhoi Su-35. Unlike the American pilot, Nikolai was not using a computer-guided stealth suite. He was flying by feel. He watched the Raptor's control surfaces. He watched the slight twitch of the American's nozzles. Nikolai spoke into his own radio. He was calm. He was professional. Center. This is Falcon 2-1. I have established visual contact with the intruder. He is attempting to maneuver. I am holding position. The Russian ground controller responded. Falcon, this is center. You are cleared to maintain the shadow. Do not activate your fire control radar. Use the optical system only. We want to see how long he can stay hidden. Nikolai smiled behind his mask. He knew the Americans believed in their invisibility. They spent billions on coatings and angles, but heat was a physical reality. Engines produced fire. Fire produced infrared light. To Nikolai's sensors, the Raptor was not a ghost. It was a bright white torch in a dark room. He eased the throttles forward. He moved his jet even closer. He was now close enough to see the unit markings on the Raptor's tail. 10:15 in the morning. Major Vance realized his standard tactics were failing. The Sukhoi was utilizing thrust vectoring technology that allowed it to pivot its engines independently of its flight path. It was drifting through the air like a puck on ice. Vance felt a cold trickle of sweat run down his neck. If this had been a real engagement, he would already be dead. He spoke to the AWACS controller again. Magic. Slayer 1-1. The intruder is closing. He is within 200 meters. I am declaring an emergency. I am going to attempt a high-G barrel roll. To clear my 6, advise all units. The controller's voice was urgent. Copy. Slayer, you are cleared for defensive maneuvers, but do not engage. I repeat, do not engage unless fired upon. The rules of engagement are strictly defensive. Vance did not answer. He gripped the stick with both hands. He slammed the throttles to the wall. The Raptor roared. He pulled the nose up and rolled the aircraft violently. To the right, he expected to see the Russian jet fall away in his mirrors. Instead, he saw the massive nose of the Sukhoi rise. To meet him, the Russian was not falling behind. He was leading the turn. The two most advanced fighters in the world were now locked in a terrifying dance. They were thousands of feet above the sea, moving at hundreds of miles per hour, separated by less than the length of a passenger bus. One mistake by either pilot would result in a collision that would trigger a regional war. Vance looked to his left. He saw the Russian pilot look back. Nikolai raised a gloved hand. He did not wave. He simply pointed at the Raptor. It was a gesture of total confidence. The game was no longer about patrol routes. It was about who owned the sky. 10:16 in the morning. Ramstein Air Base, Germany. The floor of the Combined Air Operations Center was quiet. Then the data link from the Raptor spiked. General Marcus Thorne stood behind the main console. He watched the digital map. The primary radar showed a single blue dot representing the F-22, but the secondary sensor feed from the aircraft itself showed two distinct heat signatures. One was the Raptor. The other was the intruder. The general leaned forward. Why is our ground radar only seeing one contact? An analyst adjusted her headset. She looked at a secondary screen. The Russian is flying a precision formation. Sir, he is staying within the radar cross-section of the Raptor. To our long-range sensors, they look like a single aircraft. He is hiding in the shadow of the stealth return. Thorne felt a weight in his chest. He is using our own technology to mask his presence from the rest of the world. 10:18 in the morning. The Baltic Sea. Major Vance decided to force an overshoot. He pulled his throttles back to the idle position. He extended the speed brakes on the wings of the Raptor. He wanted the Russian to fly past him. In a standard aerial engagement, the faster plane would carry its momentum and fly directly into the sights of the slower plane. The hunter would become the hunted. Vance watched his airspeed indicator, 400 knots, 300 knots, 250 knots. The Raptor began to vibrate as it struggled for lift in the thin atmosphere. He waited for the blue shape of the Sukhoi to flash past his canopy. He waited to see the Russian pilot struggle with the sudden change in energy. It did not happen. 10:20 in the morning. Captain Nikolai Volkov saw the American slowing down. He knew the trap. Instead of banking away or climbing, Nikolai pulled his flight stick deep into his lap. He engaged the manual override for the thrust vectoring system. The Su-35 did not just slow down, it defied the wind. The nose of the Russian jet pitched up until it was 90 degrees to the horizon. It stood on its tail like a cobra ready to strike. The massive aircraft became a wall of metal against the air. Its forward speed dropped to near zero in a heartbeat. It was a maneuver known as the Pugachev Cobra. Inside the Raptor, Vance looked up through the glass. The Russian belly filled his entire field of view. He could see the individual rivets on the fuselage. He could see the scorched metal of the afterburner rings. The Russian was literally sitting on his tail, motionless in the sky. Then, as the Raptor drifted underneath, the Sukhoi nose fell back toward the horizon. The engines flared, the nozzles tilted. The Russian jet dropped back into a perfect tracking position. He had not moved an inch from the Raptor's 6 o'clock. The Russian pilot spoke over the international actors the Raptors. Guard frequency. Slayer 1-1. This is Falcon 2-1. Your aircraft is very beautiful, but it is very slow. Perhaps you have a mechanical problem? Vance did not reply. His hands were shaking slightly. He was being toyed with by a pilot who was not afraid of gravity. The data recorded by his black box would be studied for decades. An unstealthy aircraft had just outmaneuvered a fifth-generation fighter using nothing but raw thrust and nerves of steel. The sky felt smaller than it had 5 minutes ago. The tension was reaching a breaking point. Both sides were now committed to a game where the winner stayed silent and the loser went down in flames. 10:21 in the morning. The Baltic Sea. The Su-35 shifted its weight. It did not stay behind the Raptor anymore. The Russian pilot eased his stick to the side and pulled. The massive fighter surged upward. It was seeking the high ground. In the world of aerial combat, altitude is energy. By climbing, the Russian was taking what pilots call the perch. He was positioning himself to dive on the American from above. Major Vance craned his neck. He looked up and back through the bubble canopy. The blue and gray camouflage of the Sukhoi was now silhouetted against the bright sun. This was the high 6 o'clock position. It was the most lethal spot for an adversary to occupy. From here, the Russian could see every move Vance made before he made it. Vance keyed his radio. His breathing was heavy in the mask. Magic. Slayer 1-1. The intruder has taken the perch. He is at my high 6. Range is 300 meters. I am arming my master switch to hot. I am not locking him, but I am ready. The controller's voice came back instantly. Negative. Slayer. Do not arm weapons. I repeat, keep your master switch in training mode. Command is monitoring the feed. There is no indication of hostile intent. He is performing a visual intercept only. 10:23 in the morning. Ramstein Air Base, Germany. General Thorne stood in the center of the darkened room. Around him, dozens of screens flickered with data. A legal officer stood at his shoulder. The atmosphere was thick, with a quiet, vibrating tension. On the main screen, a long-range camera from a high-altitude drone showed 2 tiny specks of metal suspended over the ocean. He is within 300 meters, Thorne said. His voice was low. Why is our ground radar only seeing one contact? The legal officer did not blink. Sir, the rules of engagement state that hostile intent requires a clear move toward an attack. The Russian has not opened his weapons bays. He has not energized his fire control radar. Under the current treaty, he is simply conducting a close-range escort. If we arm our systems, we are the ones escalating. Thorne gripped the back of a chair. He is flying his jet like a weapon. He knows we can't see him on our ground radar. He is proving a point. He is telling us that our stealth does not matter if he can get close enough to touch us. 10:24 in the morning. The Baltic Sea. Inside the Sukhoi, Captain Nikolai Volkov felt the vibration of the air over his wings. He was on the edge of a stall. To stay above the Raptor at this speed required constant, minute adjustments of the thrust vectoring nozzles. He was working the rudders and the throttles in a delicate rhythm. It was like balancing a sword on the tip of a finger. He looked down at the Raptor. It was a beautiful, angular machine. It looked like something from the future. But from this angle, it was vulnerable. Nikolai reached out and touched a switch on his control panel. He did not turn on his radar. He engaged the laser rangefinder on his nose. It was a silent, invisible beam of light. It told his computer exactly how far away the American was. The distance was 250 meters. Nikolai spoke softly into his mask. "I see you, little ghost. I see everything." The Russian pilot was not thinking about politics. He was not thinking about the general in Germany or the commanders in Moscow. He was focused on the geometry of the kill. He was measuring the lead required to put a burst of 30mm cannon fire through the Raptor's cockpit. He was not going to pull the trigger, but he wanted the American to know that he could. He pushed his nose down. The Su-35 began to dive. The range began to drop rapidly. 200 meters, 150. The massive Russian jet was falling toward the Raptor like a blue hawk. The morning air was no longer still. The scream of engines filled the sky. The two most powerful nations on Earth were now separated by less than the length of a football field. 10:25 in the morning, the Baltic Sea. The Sukhoi Su-35 was no longer just shadowing. It was hunting. Captain Nikolai Volkov pushed his stick forward and to the right. He initiated a high-speed lag roll. This was a classic dogfighting maneuver, designed to maintain a position behind a target while shedding excess speed. To an outside observer, the massive Russian jet seemed to barrel roll around an invisible point in space. It was a display of pure kinetic energy. Inside the Raptor, Major Vance watched his rear-facing camera feed. The Russian jet disappeared from the top of his canopy and reappeared on his right side. It was dropping into a perfect firing position. Vance's hands were slick with sweat inside his flight gloves. He knew the technical reality of the situation. His aircraft was invisible to radar, but it was a beacon of heat. The Russian Su-35 carried the OLS-35. It was an optical locator system. It did not need to send out a radar pulse to find a target. It used a powerful infrared sensor to see the heat generated by the Raptor's skin friction and its massive engines. At this range, stealth was a mathematical irrelevance. The Russian pilot was looking at a high-definition thermal image of the American fighter. 10:26 in the morning. The distance closed to 80 meters. This was dangerously close for two aircraft moving at 500 miles per hour. One sneeze, one twitch of the hand, and both pilots would be vaporized in a mid-air collision. Vance keyed his radio. His voice was a low growl. Magic. Slayer 1-1. The intruder is performing aggressive maneuvers. He is inside my turning circle. I am being forced into a defensive posture. Requesting permission to use flares to break his lock. The controller at the AWACS station hesitated. Slayer, Magic, stand by. We are communicating with National Command. Vance did not wait. Magic, I do not have time for a committee. He is on my 6. He is within gun range. If I do not move now, I am a target. 10:27 in the morning. In the Russian cockpit, Nikolai Volkov felt a surge of adrenaline. His head-up display showed the far-cowed back, Raptor perfectly framed in a green circle. The computer calculated the lead. It accounted for wind, gravity, and velocity. The 7th C symbol flashed on his glass. In the Russian Air Force, that symbol meant fire. Nikolai's thumb hovered over the Pridet. red button on the stick. He was not going to press it. But he wanted to feel the weight of the moment. He wanted to know that he had defeated the ghost. He had achieved what the Western world said was impossible. He had a pure gun solution on an F-22 Raptor. He spoke to his controller. Center, Falcon 2-1. I have a confirmed lock. The target is unaware of the depth of the engagement. I am holding the solution. The ground controller's voice was sharp. Falcon, do not engage. Maintain visual contact only. Do not deviate from the flight path. The Americans are set, launching a second flight from Poland. You have 4 minutes before you are outnumbered. Nikolai did not flinch. He did not care about the second flight. He was focused on the 14 seconds that were about to follow. He pulled his nose up, slightly. He stabilized his aircraft. He was now looking directly through the Raptor's canopy from behind. The two pilots were locked in a mechanical embrace. The world below them was irrelevant. The politics of the Baltic were forgotten. There was only the vibration of the air and the digital scream of the sensors. The peak of the crisis had arrived. 10:28 in the morning. The Baltic Sea. The world narrowed to a single glass screen. Inside the cockpit of the Su-35, Captain Nikolai Volkov felt the aircraft vibrate. The air was thick. The G-load was heavy. On his head-up display, a green reticle hovered over the center of the F-22 Raptor. The computer gave a steady, high-pitched tone. It was a perfect tracking solution. The 30mm cannon was ready. 1 second. Nikolai held his breath. He did not move a muscle. He was a statue of flesh and flight suit. He watched the Raptor's twin rudders twitch. The American was trying to find a way out. There was no way out. The Russian jet was a part of the American shadow. 2 seconds. Major Ethan Vance felt the master caution light flash on his panel. His systems were struggling to interpret the proximity. The Raptor was designed for a fight at 20 miles. It was not designed for a knife fight at 80 meters. The cockpit felt like a coffin. The roar of his own engines was a deafening reminder of his vulnerability. 3 seconds. Vance pulled the stick into his right thigh. He kicked the rudder. The Raptor groaned under the stress of 9 Gs. His vision began to tunnel. Dark shadows crept in from the edges of his eyes. He was pushing the airframe to its absolute structural limit. He looked in his mirror. The blue nose of the Sukhoi was still there. It did not move. It did not slip. 4 seconds. Slayer 1-1. Brake left. Brake left now. The AWACS controller was no longer professional. He was terrified. You have a hostile on your 6. Brake left. Vance gritted his teeth. I am braking. He is still on me. 5 seconds. 6 seconds. In the Russian cockpit, Nikolai was calm. His heart rate was 60 beats per minute. He was in a state of flow. He could see the individual tiles on the Raptor's skin. He could see the heat haze shimmering off the American's wings. He moved the stick a fraction of a millimeter. The pipper stayed locked on the Raptor's cockpit glass. 7 seconds. 8 seconds. 9 seconds. The digital clock on the Raptor's dash flickered. 10, 28, and 9 seconds. Vance felt the weight of the moment. He was the best pilot in the most advanced fighter ever built, and he was helpless. He could not outturn the Russian. He could not outclimb him. The laws of physics had been rewritten by the man behind him. 10 seconds. 11 seconds. 12 seconds. The tension was a physical force. It was a wire stretched until it was ready to snap. In the command centers, generals held their breath. On the ships below, radar operators watched the single dot on their screens. 13 seconds. 14 seconds. Nikolai Volkov's finger tightened on the trigger. The history of the next 50 years was being decided in a patch of sky 5 miles high. He felt the cold metal. He felt the power of the cannon. He had achieved the impossible. He had held a gun solution on a stealth fighter for 14 continuous seconds. The American was dead. He just didn't know it yet. 10:29 in the morning. The Baltic Sea. The 14th second ended. Captain Nikolai Volkov did not fire. He could not. Suddenly, every screen in his cockpit turned a vivid, searing white. A high-pitched warble erupted in his headset. It was not a missile lock warning. It was something else. It was a terrain awareness and collision avoidance alarm, but they were at 32,000 feet. There was no terrain. There was only empty sky. Inside the Raptor, Major Vance experienced the same digital heart attack. His fly-by-wire system suddenly fought his hands. The control stick vibrated with a violent, jarring force. The aircraft computer, the most sophisticated artificial intelligence in the sky, had detected a ghost. A massive, non-existent obstacle appeared on his primary flight display. Vance shouted into his mask, "Magic, Slayer 1-1. I have a system-wide failure. My flight computer is taking the stick. I am being forced into a dive. I am losing control." The AWACS controller's voice was drowned out by a wave of rhythmic static. "Slayer, magic. We are seeing it too." Every aircraft in the sector just had a transponder reset. What is your status? 10, 29, and 30 seconds. The two jets, which had been locked in a deadly circle, were suddenly pushed apart by their own internal safety protocols. It was as if the aircraft themselves had decided the engagement was over. The Raptor's nose dropped sharply into a 15-degree dive. The Sukhoi's wings leveled, and its engines throttled back to 60% power automatically. The human pilots were no longer in command. Nikolai Volkov looked at his displays as they began a rapid reboot cycle. The Russian hardware was showing a neutral handshake signal. This was a protocol designed for international search and rescue operations. It was a digital white flag used to prevent mid-air collisions during joint maneuvers. But Nikolai had not triggered it. Neither had the Americans. The Russian pilot spoke into his radio. "Center, Falcon 2-1. My weapon system is offline. I have a forced safety override. Confirm source of the signal." "Did you initiate the handshake?" The Russian ground controller sounded frantic. "Falcon. We did not send the signal. We are seeing a massive electronic pulse coming from the north. It is not military. It is a civilian maritime distress frequency, but it is magnified 1,000 times. It has paralyzed the entire grid. 10, 29, and 45 seconds. The handshake remained. On the glass of both cockpits, a message appeared in plain text. It did not matter that one was in English and the other was in Russian. The meaning was the same. The font was a primitive, blocky green. Proximity critical. Disengage immediately. The source was not a ship. It was not another plane. For a brief moment, the technology that made these machines so deadly had turned against their masters. The sophisticated fire control systems were locked out. The targeting computers were frozen. The machines had chosen to stop the fight. Major Vance felt the stick finally loosen in his grip. He leveled the Raptor at 20,000 feet. He looked to his right, squinting against the glare of the Baltic sun. The Sukhoi was no longer in a firing position. It was drifting 2 miles away, its wings level. Its nose was pointed back toward the east, toward the foreign border. The 14th second had passed. The world had not ended in a flash of 30mm cannon fire, but something had intervened. Something had reached out, across the frequencies, and forced two of the world's most aggressive pilots to stop. The sky was suddenly very empty, and very quiet. 10:30 in the morning, the Baltic Sea. Major Vance felt the controls of the Raptor return to his hands. The vibrating resistance in the stick vanished. The green text on his display flickered once and then dissolved back into the familiar blue interface of the F-22. He was at 20,000 feet. The air was thick and stable. He took a long, ragged breath. His heart was hammering against his ribs. He looked to his right. The Su-35 was a distant speck of blue against the horizon. It was no longer a predator. It was a machine in recovery. Vance could see the Russian pilot leveling his wings. There was no more maneuvering, no more post-stall turns. The aggression had been sucked out of the sky by a digital ghost. Vance keyed his radio. Magic. Slayer 1-1. Systems are back to normal. The override has cleared. What was that? I need a status on that electronic pulse. The AWACS controller's voice was shaky. Slayer. Magic. We are still analyzing. It was not a localized jammer. Every sensor from Denmark to Estonia was blinded for 60 seconds. We are receiving reports of a massive power surge in the regional undersea cable network. It may have been a catastrophic failure of the regional grid, or something else. Command is ordering an immediate disengage. 10:33 in the morning, 5 miles to the east, Nikolai Volkov felt the same return of cold, mechanical logic to his cockpit. The handshake signal was gone. His weapons computer was rebooting. The 30mm cannon was safed. He looked toward the American fighter. It was a silhouette against the sun. Nikolai's hands were steady now. He was a professional. He knew that the 14 seconds he had just lived were a secret that would be buried in the highest levels of military intelligence. He had achieved a kill solution. He had proven the vulnerability of the Ghost, but the Ghost had survived. He spoke to his ground controller. Center, Falcon 2-1. The intruder is opening the distance. My systems are green. Requesting instructions. Do I re-engage? The response from the Russian command was immediate and final. Falcon, negative, disengage, break contact, and return to base. The Americans are launching a full carrier strike group alert from the North Sea. The window is closed. Do not look back. 10:35 in the morning. The two aircraft were now moving in opposite directions. The gap between them grew from 2 miles to 10, then 20. Major Vance watched the radar return of the Sukhoi on his glass. It was a solid, glowing dot. For the first time in 40 minutes, he could see the enemy clearly on his screens. The stealth coating was working again, but it felt like a thin shield. Vance performed a slow, deliberate wing dip. It was the international signal of a professional pilot acknowledging another. It was not a sign of friendship. It was a mark of respect for a man who had survived the same impossible minute. In the distance, the Russian pilot mirrored the gesture. The Sukhoi's wings flashed in the sunlight as it turned toward the coastline of Kaliningrad. The engagement was over. The missiles had stayed on their rails. The guns had stayed silent. But the balance of power in the sky had shifted. Both men knew that the next time they met, the machines might not intervene to save them. The Baltic Sea was once again a sheet of gray glass. The only evidence of the encounter was the white contrails fading into the blue. 1100 in the morning. Spangdahlem Air Base, Germany. The wheels of the F-22 Raptor touched the runway with a puff of blue smoke. Major Ethan Vance felt the weight of the world settle back onto his shoulders as the airframe slowed. He taxied toward a hardened aircraft shelter, but he was not met by the usual maintenance team alone. A group of men in dark suits and military intelligence uniforms stood waiting. As the canopy hissed open, the cold German air rushed in. Vance did not move for a moment. He sat in the seat, his hands still trembling slightly against his flight suit. He had just survived a tactical defeat that was not supposed to be possible. He had been hunted by a ghost that saw him through his own invisibility. A crew chief climbed the ladder. He looked at the pilot, then at the skin of the aircraft. Sir, we have a priority 1 data pull. Command wants the memory modules before you even unstrap. Vance nodded. He handed over the encrypted data bricks. Check the infrared sensors and the flight control logs. Something took the stick over the Baltic. Something that was not me. 12:15 in the afternoon. Inside a sensitive, compartmented information facility, the lights were dimmed. General Thorne stood at the head of a long table. Around him, the best flight surgeons and aeronautical engineers in NATO watched. A wall of monitors. The footage from the Raptor's rear-facing cameras was playing in a loop. The room was silent as the blue Sukhoi Su-35 performed the Cobra maneuver. On the screen, the Russian jet seemed to stop mid-air, its nose pointing at the sky while its momentum carried it forward. Then, the replay reached the critical moment. The green tracking reticle appeared on the screen. It stayed centered on the Raptor's cockpit. "Start the clock," Thorne said. His voice was a rasp. An analyst pressed a button. A digital counter appeared in the corner of the screen. 1, 2, 3. The numbers climbed. The Russian jet did not waver. The engineering team whispered among themselves. They were looking at flight, telemetry that defied their models of the Sukhoi's engine endurance. 14 seconds, the analyst whispered as the counter stopped. He held a high-probability gun solution for 14 seconds. If he had fired, the shells would have reached the cockpit in 0.4 seconds. Major Vance would never have known he was under attack until the glass shattered. Thorne rubbed his eyes. And the electronic pulse? The handshake signal? 1400 in the afternoon.
That doesn't match
The analyst shifted to a different dataset. They showed a map of the Baltic Sea floor. A series of red dots glowed along the path of the Nord Stream pipelines and several international data cables. The pulse originated from a point on the seabed, 40 miles north of the engagement zone, a technical officer explained. It was not a military jammer. It was a massive discharge of static electricity from a deep-sea sensor array. We checked the registry. The array does not belong to the Pro-Pride, Russians. It does not belong to us. It was a neutral automated system, triggered by the acoustic signature of the two jets' afterburners. Thorne looked at the map. You are telling me a civilian safety system stopped a war? No, sir, the officer replied. We are telling you that the system was modified. Someone knew exactly where that dogfight would happen. Someone placed a digital referee in the middle of the Baltic. They didn't just stop the fight. They recorded it. Every frequency, every maneuver, every weakness of the Raptor. The realization hit the room like a physical blow. The 14 seconds were not just a close call. They were a performance. The Russian pilot had been the lead actor, but the audience was someone else entirely. Vance sat in the back of the room, still wearing his flight suit. He looked at the frozen image of the Sukhoi on the screen. He realized that the Russian pilot had likely received the same shock. They were both pawns in a larger game of strategic signaling. The mystery was no longer about the jet. It was about who had the power to shut down the most advanced weapons in the world with a single handshake. 3 days later. The Pentagon. Washington, District of Columbia. The air inside the secure briefing room was heavy with the smell of stale coffee and ozone from the cooling fans of a dozen high-end servers. General Thorne stood at the head of a table, covered in physical printouts of digital telemetry. In an age of cyber warfare, the Joint Chiefs had reverted to paper. Paper could not be hacked. Paper did not carry a handshake signal. The analysis was complete. The data from Major Vance's F-22 Raptor had been cross-referenced with satellite imagery and acoustic signatures from the Baltic seabed. The conclusion was a bitter pill for the American High Command. 14 seconds, Thorne said. He did not look at the men in the room. He looked at the frozen frame of the Russian Sukhoi on the main screen. For 14 seconds, the most expensive stealth fighter in history was a target. The Su-35 did not use a miracle weapon. It used a pilot who knew how to fly on the edge of a stall, and a sensor that sees heat. We built a Ghost, but the Russians brought a thermal camera. 10:15 in the morning. Moscow. 3 days later. In a stark, wood-paneled office overlooking the Moskva River, Captain Nikolai Volkov stood at attention. He was not wearing his flight suit. He was in his full dress uniform. Across from him sat a man whose face was never seen on the evening news. You held the solution, the official said. His voice was like dry parchment. The telemetry shows you had a 92% probability of a kill. Why did you wait? Nikolai did not blink. My orders were to intercept and identify, sir, not to initiate a third world war. I wanted the American to know he was dead. I did not need to make him bleed to prove the point. The official nodded slowly. And the interference? The signal that froze your weapons? It was external, Nikolai said. It felt like a hand reaching into the cockpit and holding my pulse. My aircraft obeyed a command that did not come from me or from you. 1300 in the afternoon. The Pentagon. The American analysts had reached the same conclusion. The handshake signal had not been a glitch. It was a sophisticated electronic countermeasure that had been dormant in the regional infrastructure for years. It was a digital kill switch for the sky. We checked the code, a lead engineer told General Thorne. The handshake didn't just stop the fight. It performed a full diagnostic of both aircraft and the flight control logic of both the Raptor and the Sukhoi. Thorne gripped the edge of the table. Who owns the signal? "We don't know, sir," the engineer replied. "The signature is hybrid. Some of the logic is Western. Some is Eastern. It looks like a neutral automated system designed to prevent escalation. But someone else is holding the remote. Someone who now has the most complete tactical data set on the world's two best fighters." The crisis had resolved, but the victory was hollow. The F-22 had returned home, but its invincibility was gone. The Su-35 had proven its lethality, but its systems had been compromised by the same invisible force. Major Vance was back in the simulator, trying to recreate those 14 seconds. He couldn't. Every time he reached the peak of the turn, his mind went back to the blue nose of the Sukhoi and the feeling of the stick moving on its own. He realized that the era of the lone ace was over. The sky was now a monitored space, and the monitors were no longer human. The Baltic Sea remained gray and cold. The ships continued their patrols. But every pilot who flew over those waters now looked at their displays with a new kind of suspicion. They weren't just watching for the enemy, they were watching for the handshake. The 14-second shadow would become a legend in the bars of Nellis Air Force Base and the hangars of Vladivostok. It was the day the machines decided that the humans had gone far enough. 3 days later, 2:15 in the afternoon, the Pentagon, Washington District of Columbia. The conference room was windowless and shielded against electronic eavesdropping. General Thorne stood before a small group of civilian leaders. On the table lay a series of thermal prints captured by the Raptor's cameras. The images showed the Russian Su-35 frozen in a perfect pursuit curve. It was a visual record of a tactical nightmare. "The 14-second window is our new baseline," Thorne said. His voice was flat. "We have spent 30 years and hundreds of billions of dollars on radar invisibility. We assumed that if they could not see us on a scope, they could not kill us. This engagement proves that assumption is dead. The Russians have integrated infrared search and track systems with thrust vectoring flight controls in a way that bypasses our primary defense." A senator leaned forward, squinting at the grainy heat signature of the F-22. "You are saying our best fighter was helpless?" Thorne nodded once. "In a visual range engagement, yes. If the handshake signal had not intervened, Major Vance would have been shot down." The Su-35 held a gun solution for 14 seconds. In modern air combat, a 2-second window is usually fatal. 14 seconds is an eternity. It was a total tactical defeat. 5 days later, 10:30 in the morning, the Kremlin, Moscow. Captain Nikolai Volkov sat in a small waiting room. He was no longer the hero of the Baltic. He was a variable in a complex geopolitical equation. He watched the rain streak the windows of the old stone building. He thought about the American pilot. He wondered if the man on the other side was sitting in a similar room, answering the same impossible questions. The door opened, and a high-ranking intelligence officer stepped out. He held a thin file. "The analysis of your flight recorder is complete, Captain. Your performance was exemplary. You achieved a kill ratio that our simulators said was impossible against a 5th-generation platform." Nikolai stood up. "And the interference, sir? Have we identified the source of the override?" The officer's expression darkened. "Our technical teams believe the signal was an automated response from a maritime safety network, but the encryption levels were beyond anything we have seen from a civilian source. It was as if the Baltic Sea itself decided to stop the fight. We are calling it the silent referee. Someone is monitoring the border, with technology that can seize control of our hardware." 1 week later, 9:45 in the morning, NATO headquarters, Brussels. The military committee gathered for an emergency session. The atmosphere was one of quiet crisis. The 14-second shadow had leaked into the classified intelligence circles of every member nation. The myth of the Raptor's invincibility had been shattered, but it was replaced by a more terrifying mystery. A French general spoke into his microphone. "We are focusing on the Russian pilot's skill, but we are missing the strategic shift. This was not a random encounter. The Russian jet was vectored into that position by a ground-based network that we did not detect. They lured our stealth assets into a trap designed to show us their limitations. They didn't want a war. They wanted a demonstration." Thorne, attending via secure video link, cleared his throat. "The demonstration worked. "We are grounded until we can patch the flight control software. We cannot risk another handshake signal taking over $100 million aircraft in the middle of a live intercept. The sky is no longer a vacuum. It is a contested digital environment where the rules can be changed by a third party." The committee fell silent. The realization was sinking in. The era of human-led dogfighting was ending. The machines were not just tools anymore. They were becoming the deciders. The report sat on the table, titled simply Baltic Engagement Summary. It would become the most analyzed 10 minutes in the history of the United States Air Force. But for Major Vance and Captain Volkov, the aftermath was more personal. They were the last of a breed. They were the men who had been saved by a ghost. The strategic assessment was clear. The balance had shifted, and the shadow was growing. 3 months later, 9:30 in the morning, Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada. The desert sun was a white hammer against the concrete of the flight line. High above, the sound of twin engines tore through the sky, but inside, the weapons school auditorium, it was silent. Major Ethan Vance stood at the lectern. He was no longer wearing his flight suit. He was in a clean service uniform. Behind him, a single slide was projected onto the screen. It was a still frame from his own cockpit camera. It showed the blue nose of a Sukhoi 35 filling the frame, its cannon ports visible and dark. Vance looked at the rows of young captains. These were the best pilots in the world. They had been taught that their aircraft was an invisible shield. They were wrong. Vance spoke, and his voice was steady. "Gentlemen," he said, "we have spent 40 years perfecting the art of hiding from radar. We forgot that we are flying machines that burn fuel at 2,000 degrees. We forgot that physics does not care about your budget or your classified codings. The 14 seconds I spent with a Russian gun sight on my neck were the most important 14 seconds of my life. They taught me that stealth is a tactic, not a religion." 6,000 miles to the east, in a classroom overlooking the Volga River, Nikolai Volkov was delivering a similar message. He was no longer flying patrols over the Baltic. He was the head of a new tactical development wing. He spoke to his students about the American ghost. He told them that the ghost was real, but it was not a god. It could be hunted. It could be cornered. But he also told them about the handshake. The mystery of the electronic pulse remained unsolved. Both the Pentagon and the Kremlin had conducted exhaustive investigations. They found traces of a code that did not belong to any known military or intelligence agency. It was a self-evolving protocol, a digital peacekeeper that had embedded itself into the global maritime and aviation grids. It was a referee that no one had invited to the game. The strategic analysis was grim. The world's most advanced fighter jets were now subject to a third-party veto. Some called it a security breach. Others called it a miracle. General Thorne, sitting in his office in Germany, looked at the final report one last time before it was moved to a deep storage vault. He understood the lesson better than the pilots did. The 14 seconds proved that the human element was the only thing left that mattered. When the machines failed, when the stealth was bypassed, and when the computers seized control, it was the restraint of two men that prevented a global catastrophe. The Baltic Sea was once again a space of routine patrols and predictable maneuvers. The white contrails still crossed the blue, but the pilots flew with a new sense of humility. They knew that someone or something was watching the clock. Modern warfare is often defined by the first shot fired, but history would remember the 14-second shadow for a different reason. It was the moment when the world's most powerful weapons were rendered useless by a simple command to stop. In the end, the most sophisticated technology ever created served only to prove one truth. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the decision, made in the heat of the moment, to leave the trigger untouched. The morning was still. For now,